Let's run you through the front pages this morning. Those heading to France this bank holiday could face travel hell because of cancellations and queues, according to The Sun.
Right. Meanwhile, the Mirror also leads with the Easter getaway or not getaway, with the RAC warning of traffic jams and more problems for those trying to get to France.
Up to half of doctors in England will be absent during the 4 days of junior doctors' strike next week, according to The Times.
Oh, my Lord. Meanwhile, the Mail reports that the King's backing for research into historical links between the monarchy and slavery could fuel calls for Britain to pay compensation.
The Express reports that Ukraine's ambassador says his country will fight to the last rather than negotiate with Putin.
Meanwhile, The Guardian reports that the Speaker of the House of Lords says it needs more independent expert peers amongst its members.
Pressure is growing to scrap smart motorways amid rising deaths linked to the roads and concerns over their cost. That's in the Eye.
And The Telegraph leads with a warning that dissident Republicans are planning terrorist attacks on police in Northern Ireland before US President Joe Biden's visit.
Furious Italian politicians are demanding their citizens stop using English words, says the Daily Star.
Right. OK, well, it's time to go through the papers now. I'm not sure we're doing that one quite yet. And joining us this morning is a broadcaster and head of Blathered Podcast, Sean McDonald. Welcome, Sean. And he is joined by writer and commentator Candice Holdsworth. Hello, Candice. Welcome. Thank you both for joining us on Good Friday.
Morning.
Yeah. Glad you're not travelling anywhere.
No, well, apart from here.
I am straight to the airport after here.
Oh, God, of course.
Are you?
Good luck.
Back up to Glasgow, yeah, for an Easter weekend up there.
Right.
So, yeah, I look forward to covering my first story.
Right, OK.
Yeah, go on then.
Go on.
In the Mirror.
Yeah, so the Mirror running with the standstill, the Good Friday chaos, whether you're flying by, or you're travelling by air, road or rail, you're probably looking at a very, very tough time. Don, as you had mentioned, ill-prepared at Dover Port for passport checks. I mean, it's the same time every year, more or less, but it just seems to be sometimes just a sort of British bureaucratic way of doing things, of being a wee bit ill-prepared. We've got obviously strikes, security staff that are taking place at Heathrow Airport, and obviously there is a traffic jam of a litany of people trying to get away for a wee bit of Good Friday fun and the predicted nice weather that's coming over the next couple of days. It is looking pretty chaotic. I think St Euston Station is going to be closed at some point as well. So,
Oh, excellent.
perfect timing.
Yeah, I mean, what do you reckon, Candice? I mean, what is it? Why can't we get these things right?
I know, every year it's the same story.
Every year.
There is no way that I would travel with 2 kids under 4 on Easter weekend. I mean, that is my idea of hell. I could not do it. So I've planned lots of things in London this weekend. We're going to stay put and we're happy doing that. No ways you would see me trying to travel across the channel. I think flying would be okay, but yeah, not driving.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'd be constantly asked, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?
And then what I don't understand with the rail is why they always do engineering works over Easter.
Between Glasgow and Manchester's been a nightmare as well for months. So I've felt that squeeze because I have to then travel via Edinburgh, which is frustrating, and passing my own city, double backing myself. But it feels as if it's just constant works. But yeah, why would they choose to do them at the busiest time?
In theory, it's because according to the rail networks, it is less busy. There's less people commuting, going to work. So they think no one's using the trains, even though 17 million UK car journeys alone this weekend. So people do want to travel, don't they? It's not like...
They need to reassess that, though, don't they? Because post-pandemic, train use has gone down for commuters, but up for ordinary travellers at the weekend. So they need to reassess that. Do the engineering works on a Monday morning, Sean? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would be looking. That'd be great if back in my prior life when I was working in call centres and stuff, I would have loved the opportunity to say, "Sorry, boss, trains are off. Can't come. Engineering works."
Call centres to do it all from home now, isn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. I couldn't even get around it that way.
No.
Have you actually tried phoning a call centre to complain about a train service?
Possible.
It takes longer than the actual journey.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I can't say I've ever tried that, got to be honest. Let's have a look at the Times, Candice.
Yes.
Looking at the monarchy's links with slavery?
Yeah, so this is on the front page of the Times. So King Charles has given his support to a PhD student from the University of Manchester. She's going to be looking into the royals' links to slavery. So she's going to be looking at the Royal Archives, the Royal Collection. This is also done in partnership with Royal Historical Palaces. So they're being very supportive about this. King Charles has said he takes it very seriously. I mean, at the moment, this is going on across all museums and art galleries across the Western world. They're sort of reassessing their links to slavery. The criticism of it is that if very concrete links are found, what will the calls to action be afterwards? Will there be calls for reparations? Will there be calls to return things like the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which has always been controversial? So a lot of people have said it's fine for King Charles to do this, it's well-meaning, but what could it lead to afterwards? And he needs to maybe exercise some caution. I just think you can't win. You know, if he was to completely close down any inquiry whatsoever, he'd be criticised.
Well, I think this is the problem. If he'd said, no, you're not to look into it, what would people say?
Exactly. So I think the best thing he can do is sort of open himself up to it and then try and manage it from there onwards. But I think it's becoming more difficult over time for museums and galleries to justify holding on to certain national treasures. I mean, I'm not casting any judgment. I'm just saying that we are in a particularly critical period now when it comes to these things, where there are more calls to, say, return the Elgin marbles. The Koh-i-Noor diamond is another big one, the Cullinan diamond to South Africa. So, yeah, not an easy thing to manage.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because with something like the Elgin marbles, there is an argument to say if they'd been... I mean, look, I'm not saying we should have taken them, but there is an argument to say if they had remained where they were, they actually wouldn't be in any fit state by now.
Yes, it's a very, very valid argument. And they're seen by everyone in the whole world being at the British Museum. I mean, it opens it up, it democratises it. I mean, I can understand the Greeks, I can understand their perspective, though, because it was at a time when they were occupied. So it's not a pleasant time in their history either. But I think we'd end up emptying all our museums and galleries of so many treasures when we could actually approach it in a different way in the time that we're in now. So yes, not easy. No easy answers to these questions right now.
Just outside, would it be a giant world swap shop? Because a lot of it wasn't just the Brits that were involved in borrowing work parts and treasures. But yeah, I mean, you know, the Royal Archives are amazing. There's so much information there, so it's good to look into them and study it. You know, they provide so much information. But it's what you do after, as you just said, Candy.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Oh, should we talk more motorway, Sean?
Yes.
Let's. This is your story from the Eye.
This is actually
smart motorways.
Yes, this is something that might actually catch people's interest. So the Eye are running with the smart motorways ban. There's pressure growing to scrap this smart motorway network across Britain. The way in which it works, I'm actually going to find it a wee bit difficult to explain. So basically, it will use technology to detect broken down vehicles, not really operating with a hard shoulder, but there have been linked to 79 deaths.
Well, basically what it does, I can explain it to you nice and simply. So where you normally have a hard shoulder and 3 lanes, you basically, that hard shoulder is sometimes a lane and sometimes a hard shoulder.
I mean,
and the problem is there's a section of it on my drive home. And the number of people who, even when it is a hard shoulder, still drive up it because they're used to it being a lane, and that's what kills people.
That's the confusing part. And they've got when they get rid of the actual hard shoulder, they have areas where you can break down, but they're every 500 meters or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you've got to break down at that point. What happens if you do it beforehand?
Breakdowns don't work in a schedule. They're obviously unpredictable.
Exactly.
You've got Claire Mercer. She's a 47-year-old woman, and she's been campaigning since June 2019. Her husband pulled over. He was broken down in a stretch of the M1, and he was hit by a lorry. I think with something like this, technology is great if it can make our lives easier, if it can facilitate a sort of smoother transition into things, great. But when it comes to people's lives, and you're dealing with people driving between 70 and, let's be honest, 100 miles an hour, whether they should or they shouldn't, there should be zero risks being taken. I think the government are seriously considering. I think there's the rest of a £3 billion project, which looks as if it's been paused or shelved for the foreseeable. And I think that in itself is probably going to predict how it's going to go. They wouldn't be pausing such a project. So it's something that it hasn't worked out the way they'd have liked.
No.
For my opinion, reading it, time to stop it. There are some things which do require human interaction and remove the possibility for technology to get it wrong.
It's just so then I would question it and say, well, perhaps we just need to get used to it and all the rest of it. If every day I didn't see people basically driving down a hard shoulder.
Yeah, you can understand it, can't you? Because if they think they're assuming that it's a lane. And people are probably just driving mindlessly. This was a lane yesterday.
And there's a horrible story recently during the week about an elderly couple who broke down and both died, sadly, because of the smart motorway situation. The actual inquest said that if it had been a normal motorway, the hard shoulder, they'd still both be alive.
Yeah.
Nah.
Mind you, if you do break down, it's worth remembering, and you've got to get out the car. Get out the car and move off to the side.
Yeah.
You know, climb over the barrier and do it that way, which is, you know, especially if the weather's horrible, it's not nice, but you've just got, it's not worth the risk. It's horrific. Now, let's talk about the Italians in the Daily Star.
We've already done the French, so let's do the Italians.
Mamma mia.
Yeah. So this is a slightly tongue-in-cheek story on the front page of the Star. It's in Italy. They are actually quite serious in some ways, though. In Italy, they're going to be fining people who are using official communication up to £90,000 if they use English words for things instead of Italian words. So some of the examples they've given are using the words like deadline or briefing or dispenser, and instead they have to use the Italian equivalents. Also, they are saying in this article in the Star that it's revenge for Brexit, but I don't think that quite squares, because Giorgia Meloni, I mean, she's known to be a skeptic of the European Union, not antagonistic towards them, but slightly skeptical. So I think this is just social conservatism. It's very similar to what the French do, where they sort of resist anglicisation of their language.
They still have the weekends, don't they?
Yes, yeah. They pick and choose, right?
But you've got to be flat. I mean, because we use loads of foreign words.
Oh, yes. Well, I
Don't
mean,
we?
if you actually look at French and English, I mean, you see how similar they are. I mean, huge amounts of our language come from France. That is the nature of language. I don't think you can ring fence your language. People naturally share words like this. And I think this is the criticism of this type of sort of, very small-minded social conservatism that sort of tries to barricade itself off from the rest of the world.
You're fluent in Spanish as well, aren't you?
Oh, I'm fluent in Spanish, Catalan, French and Italian, but I mean, who's counting them? But what I was going to say is...
It quite clearly is, isn't it?
Yeah, what I was going to say is, in the House of Commons, I think French was spoken until the sort of mid to late 1800s, and across language of Latin derivative, we borrow and share a hell of a lot of words. Even in French, you'll hear them say, what you're saying, like the weekend, or it's modern words that kind of make it into their lexicon. Ghosting, socials, FaceTime, it just remains in its sort of English. I find it quite funny.
Yeah.
The Welsh don't have a word for raspberry ripple.
What a shame.
Why do you know that?
Because when I was a kid, we used to get the Welsh TV station where I am. It used to come up on the TV, and they used to in all the Welsh soap operas, they'd be going, waffling on in Welsh, and then somebody say, raspberry ripple. I remember that. There you go. And what's the Welsh for microwave? GBNEWS at GBNEWS.uk, but it's something like pinkety pong.
The Japanese have something similar. The Japanese don't have words for beer, sandwich and coffee, so they have their own. So it's biruo, sandwichi and koffio. Because it's just, they weren't invented at the time of the rise of the Japanese language, which I find funny. So, I wouldn't be paying too much attention to that stuff in the Daily Star, to be honest.
There you go.
So we've just destroyed the Italians and the French now. Shall we move back to the UK?
Why not?
Yeah, let's. What about The Guardian? Sean, this is your story again, is it? Hundreds of UK companies are resorting to a new tactic to lure and retain young workers from Generation Z.
Yes, so...
Apply, Stephen.
Early finish Fridays, the new office perks as bosses are seeking to lure Gen Z staff. They're having to make it more alluring for young and creative staff to come and work for them. Now, the number of company job postings that we're offering in the early finish pre-COVID, I hate saying that word, 583. 3 years later, you're looking at 1,400, 1,500 jobs. So it is a major perk. I used to work in sort of start-up companies, and this was a sort of great aspect. Companies have to be competitive. They have to offer something slightly different. And I think people are now, the 4-day work week and stuff has been trialled. I think it's a very positive thing. And it's very likely, because who doesn't want to finish early, whether you're Gen Z, whether you're
I tell you what,
older.
I mean, I'm not opposed to it, but there's a lot of jobs. I mean, I know someone who, I mean, he's a forklift truck driver, right? And they finish early on a Friday, half day on a Friday. It's not exactly new.
No. I mean, it's fascinating. The workplace is changing. I mean, it's obviously things that were brought in during the lockdown and people's preferences have shifted, but also it's to do with the state of the job market, which is favouring employees a lot more now. I mean, I feel like as a millennial, the workplace bends towards me more than it did, say, for people who were older. And I've often found older workers, they enjoy these changes, but in some ways they're used to working very differently.
Yeah.
So you need to have a bit of change management when it comes to people who are used to working a certain way, maybe older managers, and then the preferences of their younger employees who actually want things to be done differently. And that can be difficult. Also in terms of luring people back, the over 50s who've left in quite large numbers. How do you get them back to work? So I think this is a really interesting development. We'll see where it goes. And if you can still retain the productivity that we've had.
Well, that's the key.
That's, yeah.
I personally find that I would, when I worked in these companies, I'd be finished a lot of my tasks by 11 a.m, but I'm kind of being held captive, and I'm like, I'll just look busy until I'm allowed to be released from my little cubicle. I think it's that acknowledgement that, yes, pay people
In that
for tasks.
case, shouldn't you do more? Shouldn't you do more? If you finish by 11 o'clock, shouldn't you take on...
I would be saying pay me more, because these are the tasks that you're paying me for, and if I get them done very quickly, then if you want me to do more, then pay me more. That was my
I think there's definitely a generation thing here going on.
Because it's like, well, it's all about... I'll tell you what I find quite interesting. It's the idea of people... I know people always work for themselves. You pay, you work to pay the rent and buy the food and all the rest of it. But you also need the company to be a success. Otherwise, everyone's out of a job.
Again, it just depends if the CEO's pocketing all the cash. Whereas I understand the benefit of hard work, but just to go way, way, way over and above and not see any sort of financial remuneration for that, it's kind of like...
I must admit, the funniest thing was when I was editing a national newspaper, we had the generation gap coming in here again, and I had young reporters starting, their first job on a national newspaper, and they'd come in and it's like, right, 5 o'clock, I'm finished, and it's like, no, it's a national newspaper, you can't just finish at 5 o'clock. No, but my contract says 5 o'clock, and they would go. And it's like, hold on a minute, it's the generation thing.
I think as well it's dependent on if it's your vocation, because the work I do now, I've never done working, but the work I'm referring to is typing things into a little spreadsheet.
And it's just,
sure. Well, talking of young people, raves, hallucinogenic drugs and all these awful things that we associate with young people.
That's Sunday sorted, Steve.
I mean, honestly. It's not as new as we may think, according to the Telegraph. Candice.
No, so this is a story in the Telegraph. Apparently they've found, so researchers, archaeologists have found evidence that Bronze Age people about 3,000 years ago were using hallucinogenic drugs. They've looked at hair samples, they've found artistic depictions, things found in pots. This is not new. I mean, we've spoken about, everyone knows that the pagans were having very interesting psychedelic experiences. And I actually went to a really interesting talk a few years ago, which even explored how the ancient Hebrews may have been using certain spices and herbs to enhance their religious experiences. So, it's quite interesting. Nowadays, we sort of take a more, disapproving view of these things. But I think in the ancient world, it was very different way of looking at consciousness and having visions, and we used to take prophets quite seriously then. Nowadays we might think they were crazy.
Yeah, I suppose they wouldn't think of it as taking drugs in that way, would they? It was just something, and then they felt mysteriously different afterwards.
Yes, yeah. I suppose we live in the world post the Enlightenment, so we take a very sort of rationalistic, skeptical view to things, but for them less so. Someone like Joan of Arc, for instance, she was seen as it's not 3,000 years ago, but she was seen as some sort of visionary, some sort of prophet. Nowadays, we would say she was mentally ill. So there's...
Maybe. Yeah, maybe that. Yeah,
that's been smoking a very strong herbal cigarette.
Well, she could have been, right?
Oh, she could have been a visionary and a prophet.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a tricky one, isn't it?
Herbal cigarette, Your Honour. That's going to be a lot of defences.
Yeah. Talk about analysing the hair from 3,000 years ago. Looking for drugs?
Possibly.
What thought process was that?
Oh, well, you see, it's what the scientists do, don't they?
Yeah.
Very good. Look, thank you both. We'll catch up with you a little bit later on.